The shadow on the sunstone. That was my purpose, my destiny. To be the single, flawless flaw in their perfect world. They were California royalty, drenched in Pacific light, and I was the girl from the valley heat who learned that to catch a king, you don't need a crown. You just need to know where he's vulnerable. The first time I saw Julian and Nia Vance, they were a splash of color on the glossy page of Lowe's Angels magazine. Vance Ventures CEO and art world maven Nia championed local artists. Julian was all sharp, sun-bleached perfection, a smile that could close a deal or a woman's heart with the same effortless charm. But it was her who captivated me. Nia. Her skin was the color of rich, roasted coffee, her smile genuine and warm, her elegance not borrowed but innate. She was the undisputed queen of their empire, the sunstone at its center. And I, Sloane, had decided I would be the shadow that made her stone lose its shine. My plan was simple, elegant in its cruelty. It began not with Julian but with Nia. I spent 6 months building a digital ghost, a persona named Sloane, a budding art consultant with an impeccable if fabricated online history. I frequented the same places she did. I was at the Getty, pretending to study a Van Gogh, when I accidentally bumped into her, sending her latte cascading onto my white blouse. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, her eyes wide with genuine horror. "Please, it's nothing," I said, layering my voice with a warmth I didn't feel. "A little water, it's just a shirt." Her driver offered a napkin, but she waved him off, dabbing at the stain herself with a cloth from her own Birkin bag. "This is mortifying. Let me replace it. At the very least, let me buy you a new coffee. I'm Nia." "Sloane," I said, shaking her offered hand. "And really it's fine, though a coffee does sound wonderful." We went to the cafe right there with its stunning views of the LA basin. I steered the conversation to art, mentioning a small, critically acclaimed gallery show in Culver City I knew she was following. Her eyes lit up. "You know the Ariev exhibit? Julian, my husband, thinks it's too avant-garde, but I find it breathtaking." "I think the best art makes you a little uncomfortable," I said, and I saw the spark of connection in her eyes. The hook was set. Weeks turned into months. I became a fixture. A happy coincidence at the farmer's market on Melrose, a fellow yoga enthusiast at her private class in Santa Monica. I was careful, always listening, always mirroring. I admired her taste, her charity work with underprivileged artists in Compton, her seemingly unshakable grace. I learned that Julian loved vintage Corvettes, hated dishonesty, and had a soft spot for key lime pie from a specific, unassuming bakery in Pasadena. I learned that their marriage, while strong, had its fault lines. He was consumed with expanding his tech empire down the 101 to Silicon Valley. She felt the distance, the quiet of their Newport Beach mansion when he was away. I baked him the key lime pie one evening when Nia had invited me for dinner. "A little taste of home," I'd said to her, knowing Julian was from Florida. His eyes had widened in surprise when he took a bite. "This is incredible. Tastes just like my grandmother's." "It's a secret," I'd said, meeting his gaze for a second too long. "I have a few of those." The infiltration was a slow, meticulous poison. I'd whisper to Nia, "You work so hard for everyone else, when do you get time for yourself?" planting the seed of discontent. And to Julian, when Nia was out of the room, I'd say, "She's so lucky to have you. A man who truly sees the value in building a legacy, not just a reputation." Feeding his ego. The first major crack appeared at a charity gala at the Huntington Library. I was there, of course, on Nia's arm as her guest. I wore a dress of deep emerald green, a color I knew Julian loved. I saw his eyes track me across the room all night. During a slow song, while Nia was schmoozing with a donor, I found him near a quiet exhibit of rare books. "She seems happy tonight," I said softly. "Thanks to you," he said, his voice low. "You've been a good friend to her, Sloane." "A friend," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I looked up at him, letting the carefully constructed mask of the perfect friend slip, just for a moment. I let him see the raw, calculated admiration underneath. "Is that all I am, Julian?" He didn't answer. He just stared, and in that silence the betrayal was born. The affair started a week later. A chance meeting at a hotel bar in Beverly Hills. It was easy. He was a man craving validation, and I was an expert in providing it. Our trysts were clandestine, thrilling. In hotel rooms with views of the Hollywood sign in the back of his tinted-windowed SUV parked on a secluded overlook off Mulholland Drive. I documented everything. A blurred photo of his hand on my thigh. A voice memo of him saying he'd never felt so understood. Insurance. The wedding was the goal, but the path was mine to sabotage. I began a campaign of subtle terror. Nia started receiving anonymous emails hinting at Julian's infidelity. I knew she would confront him, that he would deny it, that the doubt would fester. I comforted her, all the while stoking her fears. A man like Julian, he has so many temptations, but he'd be a fool to ever risk losing you. Then I planted the final, devastating seed. I used a burner phone to send Julian a photo. It was of Nia having a perfectly innocent lunch with her gallery partner, a handsome Frenchman named Luc. The angle made it look intimate. The accompanying text read, "Is the wife as faithful as she seems? Some say Luc's new BMW is quite a gift from a business partner." I saw the change in him immediately. The suspicion in his eyes when he looked at her, the coldness in his voice. He started questioning her about her spending, about her time. The perfect, sun-drenched world of the Vances was now a house of mirrors, and I was the one distorting every reflection. The night he called off their renewal vows ceremony, a lavish event planned for the cliffs of Laguna Beach, was the night I knew I had won. He came to my apartment in Venice, his face haggard. "It's over with Nia," he said, pouring himself a scotch. "I can't do it, the lies, the secrets." I held him, hiding my smile in his shoulder. "You deserve so much more, Julian. You deserve someone who sees only you." He proposed 3 months later on a yacht in Catalina. It was a whirlwind. Nia was devastated, a shell of the woman I'd met. She retreated from public life, a tragic figure. The world saw a marriage crumble under the weight of mutual suspicion. They never saw the architect. Our wedding was set for the same Laguna Beach cliffside where his renewal with Nia was supposed to be. The ultimate victory. I spent the morning getting ready, imagining the look on the few society pages that would cover it. The triumphant new Mrs. Vance. I stood at the back of the aisle, the ocean breeze tugging at my custom-designed Oscar de la Renta gown. Julian waited for me under the arch, his smile strained but real. The guests were a small, select group, and then I saw her, Nia, sitting in the back row dressed in a simple, severe black dress. She met my eyes and gave a small, slow smile. It wasn't a smile of sadness. It was a smile of triumph. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was she doing here? The ceremony began. We exchanged vows. My voice was a tremor, his was strong. As the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," Julian leaned in. But he didn't kiss me. He stopped, his lips an inch from mine. His voice, cold and clear, cut through the ocean's roar. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Sloane? Or should I call you Sarah? Sarah Miller from Reseda, the girl with the bankrupt father and the talent for forgery and fraud." The world tilted. The sun was too bright. The guests were statues. He continued, his voice projected for all to hear. "The emails to Nia, the photo of her and Luc, the secret key lime pie recipe you stole from that bakery after bribing a line cook. Did you enjoy the game?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. It was Nia who stood. She walked gracefully to the front, coming to stand beside Julian. She linked her arm with his, a united front. "You were so predictable, Sarah," Nia said, her voice calm, melodic. "We knew from the moment you spilled that coffee at the Getty. A woman like you doesn't wear a mass-market blouse to the Getty. It was a prop. We did a background check that afternoon." Julian's eyes were chips of ice. "We let you in. We let you think you were winning. We needed a reason to end our marriage without the messy, public scandal of a simple affair. A gold-digging psychopath trying to tear us apart, the perfect narrative. The prenup is ironclad, but this ensures you get nothing, and it makes us the sympathetic victims. Nia leaned closer, her voice a whisper only for me. You thought you were the shadow on the sunstone, but you were just a cloud, darling, and we knew you would pass. The efficient, who I now realized was not a real efficient but their lawyer, simply folded his papers. The guests, their closest friends and a hired photographer, began to clap. It was slow, deliberate mocking. I was left standing at the altar, alone in my priceless gown, the spectacular California sunset mocking my spectacular ruin. I hadn't infiltrated their perfect world. I had been the final, bloody test of its strength, and I had failed. The prize wasn't a wedding. It was a funeral, mine. The applause was a physical force, a wave of humiliation that crashed over me, soaking through the expensive lace of my gown, chilling my skin. It wasn't the sharp, celebratory clapping of a wedding, but a slow, rhythmic, damning beat. Each clap was a nail in the coffin of my ambition. I stood frozen, the Laguna breeze that was supposed to be the sweet air of my victory now feeling like a taunt. Julian and Nia looked at me, not with anger but with a profound, terrifying pity. That was worse than any scream, any accusation. Pity meant I was beneath them. I had always been beneath them. My mind, usually a whirlwind of calculated moves and contingency plans, was a blank white sheet of terror. They knew. They knew from the very beginning. The coffee, the pie, the art gallery, every single step I had choreographed, they had been the directors, watching their little puppet dance. Julian took a step forward, his voice low but carrying on the salt-tinged air. There's a car waiting for you at the bottom of the cliff, Sarah. It will take you to the airport. There's a one-way ticket to New York in your name, the one you used to open your first fake bank account. My breath hitched. He knew about that too. If you ever attempt to contact us or come within 100 miles of either of us again, Nia continued, her tone as smooth and polished as the sunstone she was named for. The full, unedited file of your activities, the wire fraud, the identity theft, the attempted blackmail, goes directly to the LAPD. We have a very good lawyer. The lawyer, the false efficient, handed me a simple manila envelope. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. It was my life, condensed into evidence. My past, my sins, all neatly documented by the very people I thought I was fooling. The clapping stopped. The small crowd, their faces now a blur of smug satisfaction, began to disperse, chatting amongst themselves as if they just watched a particularly satisfying play. Julian and Nia turned their backs on me and walked away, arm in arm, towards the stunning, modern villa where our reception was supposed to be. Their silhouettes merged against the dying sun, a perfect, unbreakable picture. I was alone. The photographer, I noticed, was still there, his lens now pointed squarely at me, capturing my ruin for their private collection, a trophy of their superiority. Somehow my legs carried me. I didn't walk back down the aisle. I stumbled off the stone platform onto the dewy grass, my heels sinking into the soft earth. I walked away from the cliffside, away from the villa, towards the steep, winding access road that led down to the Pacific Coast Highway. The weight of the gown was immense, a ridiculous, beautiful anchor dragging me down. I reached the road, the envelope clutched in my numb hand. A sleek black town car was idling there, just as Julian had said. The driver, a man with an impassive face, got out and opened the rear door without a word. He didn't look at me. I slid into the cold leather interior, the envelope falling to the floor. As the car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the cliffside in the twilight. Lights were now twinkling from the villa. I could hear the faint, ghostly sound of laughter and music. They were celebrating. The drive to Lax was a silent, shame-filled blur. The driver didn't speak. The radio was off. I was trapped in a soundproof chamber of my own failure. He stopped at the departure's curb, finally speaking his only words, Terminal 4. I got out standing in the chaotic, brightly lit reality of the airport in my wedding dress. People stared. They pointed, their phones coming out. I was a spectacle, a jilted bride. They had no idea. I walked into the terminal, a ghost in white satin. I went into the first restroom I saw and locked myself in a stall. With trembling fingers, I ripped at the delicate buttons of the gown, tearing it, suffocating in its perfection. I let it pool on the dirty floor, a $20,000 puddle of my defeat. Underneath, I wore a simple tank top and shorts I'd put on that morning, a small, forgotten act of practicality that now felt like a premonition. I left the dress there in that stall. I walked out in my street clothes. The manila envelope, my only luggage. I checked the board. The flight to New York was real. It was boarding. I could run. I could disappear into New York, become someone else again. Sarah Miller was a ghost. Sloane was dead. I could start over. That's what I did. That's who I was. But as I stood in line to board, a coldness settled in my gut, a feeling sharper than humiliation, more potent than fear. It was a quiet, simmering rage. They had outplayed me. They had used me as a pawn in their own marital game, a stress test for their union. They had exposed me, humiliated me, and discarded me. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. They were wrong. I took my seat on the plane by the window. As we lifted off, climbing over the sprawling, glittering web of Lowe's angels, I didn't look away. I watched until the lights became a distant, shimmering smear. I had lost the battle. The wedding was a disaster. The prize was ashes. But the war wasn't over. Julian thought he valued honesty above all else. Nia thought her elegance and grace were her armor. I knew their vulnerabilities now. I knew the cracks in their foundation because I had put them there. I knew Julian's paranoia, fed so carefully. I knew Nia's pride, the very thing that allowed her to play this long, cruel game. They had thrown me back into the shadows. Fine. But shadows can grow. They can stretch and distort. They can consume even the brightest stone. I opened the manila envelope. I read every page. I studied the evidence of my own destruction, and I began to plan, not to become Mrs. Julian Vance. That was a child's dream. My new goal was simpler, cleaner, and far more satisfying. I would become the ghost that haunted their glass house until I persuaded them to break it themselves. I would be the shadow that never passed. The game had changed, and this time I was writing the rules. The hum of the jet engines was a funeral dirge for Sloane, the woman I had crafted with such care. I stared at my reflection in the dark plane window, a pale, hollowed-out ghost. Sarah Miller from Reseda stared back. The girl with the bankrupt father, the forged transcripts, the desperate, clawing ambition that had just been publicly flayed open. But as the lights of New York City emerged below, a new, colder sensation began to crystallize amidst the shame. It was the sharp, clean edge of a diamond. Fury. They hadn't just beaten me. They had orchestrated me. For a year I had been their puppet, my every move predicted and manipulated. They had let me believe I was the spider, when all along I was the fly neatly trapped in their gilded web. The humiliation was an acid bath, but it was burning away everything weak, everything sentimental. What was left would be pure, hardened intent. The plane landed. I did not disappear. I used the last of my real cash, the emergency funds I kept separate from all my Sloane accounts, which were now undoubtedly frozen, to rent a sparse room in Astoria, Queens. It was a far cry from the Venice apartment, with the scent of gyros and exhaust fumes instead of salt air. It was perfect, invisible. For a week I did nothing but think. I laid out the contents of the manila envelope on the scuffed floorboards. It was a masterpiece of investigation. My entire fraudulent history, from the small-time credit card scams in my early 20s to the forged letters of recommendation for Sloane. They knew it all. They had accountants, lawyers, private investigators whose reach I had arrogantly underestimated. But as I studied their dossier on me, I began to see the outlines of their dossier. The way they gathered information was a blueprint of their own priorities, their own fears. Julian's section was meticulous, financial, cold. He saw people as assets and liabilities. He had focused on my forgeries, my financial deceptions. He was a builder of empires, and his greatest fear was a structural flaw, a crack in the foundation that could bring it all down. Nia's notes were different. They were psychological, intuitive. She had underlined my attempts to manipulate her emotions, my feigned friendship. She had written in the margin next to a transcript of one of our conversations, pathological lack of authentic affect. Her greatest fear wasn't financial, it was emotional. It was being made a fool of, her taste and judgment being publicly exposed as flawed. They thought they had me cornered, but a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. My first move was one they would never expect. I went to the library and used a public computer to create a new, encrypted email. I didn't target Julian or Nia. I targeted the one person they had trusted to execute my humiliation, their lawyer, the false efficient, Charles Monroe. His firm, Monroe & Cade, had a sterling reputation. But reputations, as I knew well, were facades. I spent days digging, not into his firm but into him. His hobbies, his donations, his family. His wife ran a prestigious art gallery in Soho. A gallery that, according to some very dry but public customs documents, had recently received a sizable, anonymous donation of a controversial collection of pre-Columbian artifacts. The paperwork was a labyrinth, but I'd navigated worse. The trail, carefully laundered through a shell company in the Caymans, led back to a silent partner, Charles Monroe. It wasn't illegal, not quite, but it was deeply unethical for a man of his standing, a direct conflict of interest with several of his firm's clients who were in litigation over cultural patrimony. It was a smudge on his pristine record, a smudge I could enlarge into a stain. I sent him a single email from my encrypted account. Subject: a question of provenance. Mr. Monroe, I've been admiring the Acatlin collection at your wife's gallery. The export paperwork from Mexico is fascinating reading. I'm sure the Bar Association would find it equally enlightening. I propose a brief, confidential conversation, a trade. You have a file on me. I would like a file on the Vances, not the financials, the personal, the things not in the dossier. Call it professional curiosity. I will be in touch. S. I didn't wait for a reply. I shut down the connection. Let him sweat. Let him wonder how much I knew. A man who deals in secrets fears their exposure most of all. While I waited, I turned my attention to Nia's world. Her armor was her reputation, her status as a patron saint of the arts. I needed to find the rust beneath the gilding. I created a new persona, not an art consultant but a freelance journalist, Clara Thorne, pitching a series on the real patrons of LA. I reached out to artists, gallery assistants, curators, anyone who had ever worked with Nia Vance. I praised her publicly, then in private messages gently probed. I've heard rumors, of course, that some of her discoveries were really prearranged. A PR narrative to solidify the Vance brand. It must be frustrating for the truly talented. The responses trickled in. Most were loyal. But one, from a bitter, struggling sculptor Nia had publicly dropped after a controversial show, was a goldmine. She's a curator of her own image, not of art, he wrote. She promised me the world, then dropped me when my reviews were too political. But she kept the one piece she wanted. A small, early piece I was practically starving when I made. She has it in her private sitting room. Never loaned it, never displayed it publicly. I signed the rights away for a pittance. She owns it. He attached a photo. It was a haunting, twisted figure made of scrap metal and resin. It was raw, powerful, and utterly at odds with the serene, polished, aesthetic Nia presented to the world. It was her secret, the messy, authentic piece of art she loved but was too afraid to publicly associate with. A piece of the real Nia, hidden away from view. My phone, a cheap burner, vibrated. An unknown number with a Lowe's Angels area code. I let it go to voicemail. A clipped, tense voice followed. "This is Charles Monroe. We need to talk discreetly." The hook was set. I had leverage against their gatekeeper, and I had found the first hairline crack in Nia's sunstone facade. I looked out my grimy window at the Queen's skyline. It wasn't the California dream. It was better. It was real. They had thrown me out of their garden, so I would salt the earth from which it grew. This wasn't about stealing a name anymore. It was about obliterating theirs. The voice of Charles Monroe was a tight, controlled wire of stress. I could almost smell the expensive scotch he was undoubtedly pouring himself through the phone. Good. Fear made people sloppy. It made them willing to trade secrets they swore they'd protect. We arranged a call via a secure, encrypted line he provided, a small testament to his paranoia, which was now my asset. When his voice came through again, it was stripped of its courtroom polish. "What do you want?" he demanded, dispensing with pleasantries. "I told you. A trade," I said, my voice calm, flat. The hysterical bride was gone, buried in the California cliffs. "Your file on me was comprehensive, but it was a business file. I want the personal annotations. The off-the-record concerns Julian whispered to you over a cigar. The doubts Nia confessed during your wife's gallery openings. The things that never made it into a formal report." He was silent for a long moment. "That is a profound breach of attorney-client privilege. And the Acatlin collection is a profound breach of ethical standards. I wonder which the California bar would find more profound." I let the threat hang in the static between us. "I'm not asking for anything you can't live without, just the color commentary, the human weaknesses." "Why?" "Because they thought my weakness was a spectator sport," I said, the ice in my voice betraying me for a second. "I'm just curious about theirs." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the soft clink of glass. "I'll need 24 hours. "You have 12. I ended the call. The game was in motion. While I waited for Monroe to betray his clients, I focused on the sculptor. I became Clara Thorne, his sympathetic confidant. "It's a tragedy," I wrote. "That piece is a part of your soul, and it's locked away in her private collection. It's the best work you've ever done, and the world never got to see it. She didn't just drop you, she buried your masterpiece." I fed his resentment, stoking it from a smolder into a blaze. Then I made my offer. "I'm working on a piece about the art the elite keep for themselves, the hidden masterpieces. I want to feature your sculpture. I can't pay you, but I can give it the spotlight it deserves. All I need is proof it's there. A current photo, something that places it in her home recently." He was hesitant at first, but the lure of recognition, of posthumous vindication for his younger, hungrier self was too strong. He gave me the blueprint I needed. He remembered the room, the lighting, the exact spot on a low sandstone plinth. He even recalled Nia's security system, a high-end European brand he'd installed briefly in his starving artist days. He gave me the model number. It had a weakness he'd noted: a slight delay in the motion sensors in rooms with high, vaulted ceilings if the temperature differential between the floor and ceiling was significant, a quirk he'd found amusing. It was a thread, a tiny, almost invisible thread, but it was enough to start pulling. Monroe's file arrived exactly 12 hours later. It was not a document but a voice memo. His voice was tired, stripped of its power. He gave me what I wanted: the color commentary. He spoke of Julian's deep-seated insecurity, a fear of being seen as new money despite his billions, which fueled his obsession with legacy and old-world signifiers like that key lime pie. He revealed that Nia's first marriage, fresh out of college, had ended when her husband left her for her best friend. "She never got over the betrayal," Monroe said, his voice a low murmur. "It's her primal fear. It's why she built such a perfect, impenetrable facade. To never be caught off guard, never be humiliated like that again." It was all there, the raw, pulsing nerve of their marriage. Julian needed to be seen as authentic. Nia needed to be seen as impeccable. My plan solidified, cold and brutal. I wouldn't steal from them. I wouldn't blackmail them. I would make them betray each other. Using the last of my resources, I hired a ghost of my own, a pale, nondescript man named Leo who specialized in digital forensics and physical acquisition. He asked no questions. He was expensive. He was perfect. His task was twofold. First, using the security system details and the layout Ben had provided, he was to infiltrate the Newport Beach mansion and plant two devices. One, a tiny wireless microphone in the private sitting room near the sculpture. Two, a single, nearly undetectable keystroke logger on Julian's private home office computer, the one he used for his most sensitive off-the-books deals, which Monroe had casually mentioned. Leo's second task was to acquire a recent photo of the sculpture in Nia's sitting room. He succeeded within 48 hours, sending a single, crystal-clear image to my encrypted server. The twisted, beautiful metal figure sat on its plinth, a secret saint in a chapel of perfection. I now had everything I needed. I began the final act. I became a ghost in their machine. First, I targeted Julian. Using the information from the keystroke logger, I accessed his most private files. I found what I was looking for, the preliminary plans for Project Chimera, a secret, aggressive takeover of a rival green tech company. It was borderline unethical, reliant on leveraging debt the rival CEO, a man named David Chen, had hidden from his board. I created a new email address, meticulously spoofed to look like it was from a generic, anonymous tip line. I sent a short, succinct message to Nia's primary email, the one she checked obsessively. Subject: a question for the patron. Mrs. Vance, your husband's Project Chimera aims to destroy David Chen. It leverages Mr. Chen's private struggle with gambling debt. Is this the legacy you want to curate? Is this the authenticity you stand for? Attached is a photo of your favorite piece of art, a piece by Ben Corrigan, whom you abandoned. It seems you have a taste for collecting beautiful, broken things and hiding them away. The email had no direct threats. It merely held up a mirror. It connected Julian's ruthless, inauthentic business dealings with her own hidden hypocrisy. I sent it late on a Friday evening, when they would likely be home together, drinks in hand, pretending the world was perfect. Then I waited. The microphone in the sitting room was live. For an hour there was nothing. Then the sound of a door opening, Nia's voice cold as sharded glass. Julian, we need to talk, now. What is it? His voice was dismissive, tired. Project Chimera, David Chen gambling debt. Is this true? A long silence. I could almost see his face, the shock that his most private secret was exposed. Nia, that is a highly confidential. Don't, she snapped. Her voice was trembling, not with sadness, but with a fury born of a betrayal she had spent her life trying to preempt. You sit in judgment of everyone, you and your value of honesty. And you're doing this. You're a fraud, Julian, a common, ruthless fraud. And you, he shot back, his own anger rising, deflecting. What is this about a photo? What are you hiding in here? I heard footsteps, then a sharp, horrified intake of breath from Nia. She had seen the photo I'd sent, realizing I knew her most private secret. You're investigating me, she whispered, her voice cracking. You're accusing me, he roared. Who sent this? Who is doing this? And then, the words that shattered their world, spoken by Nia with a venom I knew was meant for me, but would forever poison H.